bloody tunic. Genesis 37, verses 31 to 35, New English translation. So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a young goat, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they brought the special tunic to their father and said, "We found this. Determine now whether it is your son's tunic or not." He recognized it and exclaimed, "It is my son's tunic. A wild animal has eaten him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters stood by him to console him, but he refused to be consoled. "No," he said, "I will go to the grave mourning my son." So Joseph's father wept for him. Penny and I had the opportunity to drive up to Virginia this past week. We got to walk in the snow and visit some people we hadn't seen in a while. But the excuse we used for traveling was that Tuesday was the birthday of one of our grandchildren. Tuesday morning came and I witnessed a wonderful sight. I had woken up and was doing my devotions at the kitchen table. Suddenly the quietness was broken by two very small children running downstairs together. They were playing together and just enjoying each other's company. The older sister started singing to the birthday girl. It was the happy birthday song, the same song we sing here each Sunday morning when we are celebrating with one of our members. At the end of the song, the older sister tacked on, "Happy birthday, Jesus bless you," and my heart melted. One of the joys of being a parent is when you have the chance to see and hear your children or grandchildren enjoying each other's company. That was a joy that Jacob had lost. He was a profoundly unhappy man. And the things that happened, as recorded in today's text, added even more sorrow to him. I'm not going to go over all the events of the story because I'm sure you all read today's chapters. Instead, I'm going to focus my message on one object that is introduced in the story, the bloody tunic that Jacob's sons showed their father. The tunic was a symbol of love. It did not start out as evidence of a crime scene. It started as a precious gift given by a proud father to his favorite son. Jacob loved Joseph because he was the firstborn of Rachel, who was always his favorite. This chapter says that Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was a son born to him late in life, and he made a special tunic for him. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated Joseph and were not able to speak to him kindly. Verses 3 to 4. So we see that the patriarchs continue to produce broken, dysfunctional families. What made matters worse was that Joseph had some interesting dreams that indicated that at some point all his family would bow down to him. That just made the 10 brothers greener and more angry at him. Meanwhile, his father just kept in mind what he had said. Like Mary, the mother of Jesus, Jacob pondered these things in his heart. He loved Joseph so much that he would not dare rebuke him. The tunic was a special gift. It signified a special standing among Jacob's children. It was like an inheritance given beforehand. It symbolized a special relationship and set Joseph apart as a special blessing who would be blessed. It was how Jacob expressed his love for his favorite son. But the tunic was also a symbol of envy. I mentioned that the older brothers were envious of young Joseph because that special garment set him apart from them. Some of their hatred was focused on that blessing. They considered it a curse. The brothers were so envious that they saw an opportunity for sweet revenge when Joseph came to Dothan. They saw him coming, and before he even reached them, they had already plotted to kill him. They said, "Come now, let's kill him, throw him into one of the cisterns, and then say that a wild animal ate him. Then we'll see how his dreams turn out." Two of the older brothers displayed a bit of constraint. Reuben, the oldest, suggested that they just throw him into a deep hole. Judah suggested that they sell him to some foreign traders who happened by. As soon as Joseph reached them, the brothers stripped him of that precious tunic and tossed him into the hole. When the foreign traders arrived, they fished him out and sold him to them for 20 silver coins. They got their revenge and some money to sweeten the deal. The tunic was also a symbol of treachery. It was a symbol of sibling rivalry to the extreme, like Cain, who waited until his brother was alone with him in the field and clobbered him to death. They cared so little for their own brother that when the opportunity presented itself, they took it. The wonderful colored tunic that had been a sign of their father's love would now be evidence of Joseph's supposed death by a wild animal. All it took was some goat's blood. No doubt these sons of Jacob had been told many times of their own father's betrayal of his brother, Esau. He found Esau hungry and offered him a bargain, some stew for his birthright. Then he and Rachel cooked up a scheme where they would deceive his father Isaac by pretending to be Esau and getting his blessing as firstborn. So these sons of Jacob cooked up a plot of their own. They would present this tunic to their father as evidence that his favorite son was dead. How ironic that Jacob himself had used a goatskin to pass himself off as Esau. Now it would be goat's blood that covered his precious garment. The tunic was also a symbol of deception. When the 10 sons returned to their father, they came with a lie and backed up their lie with a deception. They didn't say it. The best lies are those you don't say but force others to believe. They just brought the special tunic to their father and said, "We found this. Determine now whether it's your son's tunic or not." Of course, Jacob had no problems identifying this sign of his love, now covered with evidence that he had met a sudden, violent death. It was not just a lie, it was a false lie. Joseph had not died at all, though he probably often felt it would have been better if he did. At the time this incident is happening, Joseph is on his way to Egypt to be sold as a slave. He was on his way to his destiny, but his brothers had convinced Jacob that he was ended. They had their revenge against the dreamer and got rid of those pesky dreams, they thought. The tunic was a symbol of mourning. When I was 11 years old, I had an older brother. His name was Gary. He was 16. I remember a joyous day when Gary brought home his special prize. It was a green Honda 100 motorcycle. Gary loved that vehicle. He went everywhere with it. It was a symbol of his pride in being able to ride it and his joy that it was his very own. But in June of that year, a terrible thing happened. I can still remember my mother getting a phone call. I don't know who called her, but what I recall was that Mom was calm and collected on the phone, but as soon as she hung up, she called out to my dad, "Come on, Buck, Gary's been in a wreck." The two of them left the house quickly, and my 2 sisters and I began praying and crying. Gary died that day. Some well-meaning people took his broken and mangled motorcycle and brought it to all the nearby schools. They used it as evidence to teach young people to be extra cautious on motorcycles or don't ride them at all. They also had his cracked helmet with a blood smear still prominent on it. Sometime later, they brought that wrecked motorcycle back to our place and dumped it in a pile. And from then on, every time we saw that pile, we grieved again. The Bible does not say what Jacob did with that bloody tunic. It just says Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters stood by him to console him, but he refused to be consoled. No, he said, "I'll go to the grave mourning my son." So Joseph's father wept for him. Actually, the Hebrew says something even more specific. Jacob said that he would go down, Jarad, to Sheol, to his son in the morning. Sheol is the state of being dead. Jacob planned to mourn himself to death and join his son in the state of death. The Bible tells us some specific things about Sheol. Sheol is always described as a place that is down there, a place you descend, the Arad, to. When the biblical authors compare it to something, they always compare it to a pit or destruction. When Eric Lewis examined the 65 references to Sheol in the Old Testament, he concluded that the term specified not the place of interment, nor a presumed locality of departed spirits, but the condition of death, the death state. Sheol is also described as a place of silence. When David was in threat of death, he cried out to God to deliver him because he said, "In death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise?" Psalm 6:5. To David, there is no afterlife. There was merely silence and stillness, a waiting on God to perhaps rescue by resurrection. To the Old Testament saints, a residence in Sheol would not be considered a goal to attain. It was an inevitable consequence of their mortality to be avoided at all costs. Sleep. Sheol is also described as a dark place where people sleep. It is a silent, dark state or condition in which everyone exists at death and can only live again by a resurrection from the Lord. It is always contrasted with heaven and never equated with it. It is not the hope of the saints. Rescue from it is the hope of the saints. That's the Old Testament consensus. When Jacob said he was going to Sheol, he was not anticipating a happy reunion there. When Jacob saw that bloody tunic, he was convinced that all hope was lost. When we experience tragedy, we can start feeling that way too. But we can learn from this story. Tragedy does not mean that everything is lost. As long as we have a God in heaven with a plan for our lives, we can trust him to carry out that plan. Jesus told us that in the world we will have trouble, but he also told us that he has overcome the world. We can find our hope in him. He gives a hope of a life after death. It starts with a resurrection unto eternal life. That is a destiny we can cling to no matter what we face today.